Welcome to the DEC4 podcast. You can access episodes, companion articles, research notes and links, as well as information about our contributors and supporters at DEC4podcast.com. Hope you enjoy the program. Gary, we're back for another Elvis and the Press. Thank you for being here.
Great to be back with you. I'm excited to talk again.
Okay, so we are looking back to the first tour of 1974, and that went from March 1st to March 20th. It was notable because it was the tour in which Elvis played at home for the first time in, well, more than a decade. 5 shows at the Mid-South Coliseum. But the show we're looking at is just 3 nights in on March 3rd, and that is Elvis's engagement at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo at the Houston Astrodome. And we have a great soundboard, great quality soundboard recording that we can refer to on this one. And it's interesting, there was quite a bit of soundboard activity, quite a bit of recording from the soundboard around this time, because unbeknownst to the band, they were planning a live album, which they ultimately recorded on the last night of the tour. March 20th at Mid-South Coliseum. But here we are on March 3rd. We're at the Houston Astrodome for the matinee show. As I said, we have the soundboard recording. There are no effects mics, of course, so we don't get much of a sense of the audience reaction until right at the very end when Elvis is saying his farewells. And if you happen to be listening with headphones, you can really hear the enthusiasm of the audience in the background. Now, there are lots of interesting things about this show. Gary, the staging is different. Obviously, the venue is different. Elvis is part of a sequence of events rather than the sole attraction. Let's have a bit of a talk about the show. Oh, I should say, of course, Gary, that we are grateful to Francesc Lopez, elvisconcerts.com, for the tour schedules and for the transcript of the press review that we're going to go into very shortly. And of course, elvisconcerts.com is celebrating 30 years online this year, 2026. So thanks to Francesc Lopez, big shout out to him and our undying appreciation. But Gary, let's get to the show first. One of the interesting things about it, of course, is because of the staging, which we'll go into, there was no orchestra. So it really was back to basics rock and roll. So can you give us a bit of an idea of what you thought about the show and some of the highlights?
Well, I thought it was actually a really good show, and you're right about the quality of this recording. I was a little bit surprised, and I know that you made a note here that likely this recording that we're listening to some 50 years later, the show sounds 10 times better than it would have at the venue at the time. So the result is a really great sound. And so I had to keep in mind that it's 74. I've been sort of lukewarm to a bit lukewarm to the shows that come later in Elvis's life near the end, the 76 and 77. But in 74, things were still in pretty good shape in Elvis world. And I found that Elvis was sounding really muscular from the outset and really energetic. Again, the sound quality really brought that home. But Elvis himself sounds engaged and ready to rock. I know that I was really listening for the absence of orchestra and what I thought that would result in. Oddly, I found that I don't want to discount any orchestras that Elvis worked with, but I didn't think anything was really lacking. Even in the bigger numbers, like How Great Thou Art was actually quite nice with just the voices. I don't know if having so many vocalists on stage with you can somehow make up for the lack of an orchestra, but maybe perhaps because it's a venerable old gospel song that is popular amongst gospel quartets, that having so many voices singing just made it really pop for me. That one was really great. I love hearing Trying to Get to You. I know from the recording later in this tour that you referenced, I was pleasantly surprised to hear it included in that show when I first heard that record, because I've always really loved that song, mostly because of his treatment during the comeback special. But that's a real gem from the 50s, and I might pair it with something like Mystery Train or some of those, I don't want to call them lesser lights, but some of the tracks from the early days that are just killer, and I was glad to hear that he did that. Help Me, I thought, was also a bit of a highlight for me, and I getting to have a bit of a thing with with Let Me Be There. I just think that song is really buoyant and really energetic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's a real highlight as well. Yeah.
It really bounces and it really takes the listener along for a bit of a ride. And I really was hearing James Burton during the song. I thought that he played really well and added to the sparkle of that recording. I guess the power of Elvis's voice at this point and the voices he surrounded himself with made up, so to speak, for not having an orchestra. Suspicious Minds, for example, the voices were really strong and it was a really energetic performance. And the breakdown, when he breaks it down in the middle there, sounded really strong and really good. And he's just, I guess it's early enough that he's really engaged still, really singing well. I did have a couple of bones to pick with the show. You know, I've often talked about his original 1956 recording of Hound Dog and how with Scotty Moore, the two of them, you know, created something. It's hard to even put into words there. I mean, also the pairing of the two men. You can go down the ages, pairing the singer with a guitarist. There's so many examples, but here is the origin of that. And the song is so it's just so majestic. But every time he does it in concert, it's so maddening because it seems like he just discounts the song totally as a song. It's just Hound Dog equals Elvis Presley equals Hound Dog, so I'll sing it for you. He races through it at a breakneck pace. It's 50 seconds of the same 10 words, it seems, over and over again. I'm not sure why he's even doing it. If you're a fan and you really love it in 74 and you really want to hear him do that, when you hear him do it that way, are you satisfied? Are you happy with that? Or are you thinking, well, dang, that's kind of different? So that really bothered me. And I love and respect J.D. Sumner, but I don't think I have the same appreciation for his really deep bass singing in a lead setting. It's a little bit like when I'm listening to jazz and the stand-up bass player takes a solo and it's so kind of low in the register that you almost can't, you struggle to hear it. So something about JD singing, I don't have the same appreciation, but I thought it all sounded, you know, much closer to Aloha from Hawaii than it does to later shows that were, you know, near the end. And I feel like we can group this one in with, you know, some of his best live work. I guess it was still early days enough. And the small group setting, the rock and roll aspect of the lack of orchestra, I think really works, and I was really pleased with the show.
As we've mentioned with our shows that we've talked about from 77, for people that are most familiar with Aloha, That's the Way It Is, Elvis on Tour, there might be some unfamiliar names in the lineup. On bass, we have Duke Bardwell. His involvement with the TCB band is kind of a saga in itself. I don't think it was entirely happy, and I don't think he was to blame for that, quite honestly, but that's a whole other thing to go into with Duke Bardwell. Very talented singer-songwriter in his own right. We also have, as you alluded to, the voices, Gary. We have an extra vocal trio on stage at this time, a creation of Elvis's own called Voice, and that was made up of Cheryl Nielsen, who of course we recognise as the soloist from later on in the 70s, Donnie Sumner, JD's nephew, and Tim Beattie, and they provide some additional muscle with the backing vocals there. And it's interesting too, the staging, as you mentioned, a small rotating stage was towed out into the arena floor, so the audience wasn't close to the stage, like, you know, where they normally would just plonk the stage on the arena floor and the audience would be right up getting scarves and kisses and whatever. The audience was quite a distance from the stage. As we said, with the soundboard recording, which, by the way, we've, of course, embedded in this episode's webpage, as a result, you don't get the same atmosphere that you do from some of the other arena shows. And the other interesting thing, Gary, was the ending. And there wasn't the breakneck, you know, desperate running the gauntlet to the limo. There was an extended jam. Obviously, the lack of orchestra meant that there was no opening fanfare, and the closing jam was a little different as well. Elvis did a lap of a lap of honour of the Astrodome in an open Ford Bronco, while the band actually played a very nice extended jam, which I think perhaps deserves some commentary just on its own.
Yeah, I thought it makes this show very unique. That's for sure. I mean, and I guess I do think it's a little bit weird playing in the middle of a field with people far away. The rodeo participants, were earlier running around the same field that Elvis is now singing in. So it's a little bit, I guess maybe people in the stands too might have thought it was odd. Visibility, it must have been an interesting situation. I'm not sure what the sound was like. I know we've talked about how in the venue it wasn't the best, but I guess, they were seeing and hearing Elvis and everybody was thrilled about that. I wonder, what the average fan would have said walking away though to that staging, where the stage was. And driving around at the end, that's fascinating too, because, and maybe Elvis, I don't know, maybe he got a bit of a kick out of that. I mean, he normally would race away to the limo, as you say, almost out of necessity, the spent energy plus knowing full well the pandemonium afterwards, and it's just out of necessity getting out of there as quickly as I can because the place is about to go off, and to have a more controlled exit, that's pretty unique in Elvis world, and it might have been pretty unique for him, and it must have had something to do also with the closeness, the proximity. I mean, people weren't as close to him as they would be at a normal show, but at the same time, he wasn't as close to them. So partly it might have been for his own benefit to just get a bit of a closer look and to wave. We all know how he was with the fans and wanting a bit of engagement and closeness. And so driving around like that is quite fascinating. I'm so glad that there's a picture that remains that shows such an event because it's pretty unique. And I keep saying unique, but it is a fascinating show. I mean, it's very different in his itinerary of concerts throughout the 70s. And, the numbers are there too. It was not like it was a failure in any way. It was pretty successful. And in the end, we have this really great recording to hear the excellent concert. It's interesting also, just at the end, Elvis, when he's sort of thanking the rodeo organizers and thanking the audience, and the fact that he mentions how appreciative he is that everyone has come out to see them in the midst of an energy crisis. That was fascinating. It was very topical. Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah, we can relate to that, I think, now. We can, yes.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this time to thank the people at the Astrodome for inviting me back again this year. But most of all, I'd like to thank you because of the energy crisis and everything. You drove all the way to see us and the Cowboys and the rodeo. I'd like to thank you very much. I'd like to tell you something else. This is the largest audience that I've ever sang to. So... It makes one a wee bit nervous, I'll tell you. Anyway, I'd like to sing this song especially for you. You mentioned the sound as well. Duke Bardwell, in a later interview, said that they couldn't, because of the staging, they couldn't use their normal Clare Brothers rig. What they normally did, the speakers were hoisted up from the ceiling of the arena above the stage. They obviously couldn't do that because the ceiling, the Astrodome ceiling was so high. So they did have to make the best of whatever they could do with the house system. There's certainly none of the coverage that I've read has had any issues with the sound. So I don't think that detracted from people's enjoyment of the show. Well, good. And we'll a couple of things about the staging, and actually a couple of things to expand on that you mentioned in the review in the Houston Chronicle that we'll go into in a minute. We should mention Elvis had also played the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo back in 1970, and a little later we'll just bring in a couple of interesting things for context from that engagement. And in fact, during this engagement, he broke his own record. And the recording we listened to is the matinee show, even though Elvis does say good evening, but he was prone to get a little bit confused about the time of day when on tour. Okay, let us move now to some of the press coverage, and we'll start off with a straight news item which was on the front page of the Houston Chronicle on the following day, Monday, March the 4th, 1974. The headline is, "Another record for Elvis, 44,175 in Dome."
The magnetism of singer Elvis Presley drew record crowds to the final day of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. The throngs pushed the show and rodeo's total attendance to a record 671,425. The previous high was 641,412 set last year. Presley's matinee performance Sunday attracted 43,974, breaking the previous record of 43,614 set by Presley in 1970. But the new mark lasted only until Sunday night, when 44,175 looked on. An estimated 100,000 persons saw the Livestock Show and Rodeo Sunday. And then the final paragraph, the Astrodome attendance Sunday of 88,149 was the largest single-day attendance in the stadium's history for any event. So either way, there were a lot of people there, Gary. So now we go to the Houston Chronicle review, and this was written by Jeff Millar, Millar. He was the entertainment writer for the Houston Chronicle, also an author, playwright, and co-creator of the comic strip Tank McNamara, which is still in syndication today. He passed away in 2012 from cancer, sadly. So let's go back to his review of the show at the Astrodome. And Gary, I'm just going to apologise to our listeners before I read this first paragraph. And we just have to remember the 70s was a slightly different time. Okay. Occupying the standing room only space next to me at the rodeo Sunday afternoon was one of those 33-year-old Dumplin' Darlings. Here we go. Her husband's got to love her because there's a lot of girl to love, who was keeping a vigil for Elvis Presley. How do you reckon that? How do you reckon that works as an opening paragraph, Gary?
Well, I tell you, like you say, we have to keep in mind the context of the times and all that. But from a writing standpoint, it's just hokey. It's just kind of dumb. It's a dumb way to start a review, no matter what year it is. So when I was reading the review, I was at a deficit right off the get-go, and I had to keep reading to hopefully dig out of this hole. But yeah, it's quite an intro.
There's a bit of a cynical and quite insulting editorial line on the fans in some of these reviews, whether it's their southern accent or in this, this poor lady's, physical appearance and voice and whatever. So there is a bit of a theme, isn't there, Gary, about the fans getting a bit of a pasting.
It's interesting, the perspective. We often talk about looking back from this point, it's a different view than there was at the time. And yes, you're right. You've explained it perfectly. That's what it does sound like. It's almost a dismissing of the fans. It's like a lot of the commentators had no idea that 50 years later, they'd be dead and gone and forgotten, but people would still be writing about Elvis Presley and still be talking about him. And there's very serious students, and he's a very serious cultural topic and subject now. But back in the day, it seemed like a lot of commentators considered anybody who listened to him was a bumpkin a bit, to use the nicest term, because, Elvis himself would bristle, and Lisa Marie has addressed the whole white trash attitude towards, poor Southern people. Poor Southern people are painted with a broad brushstroke. Of course, that's wrong in any way, shape, or form. And not only is it wrong, but it's wrong. Like, it's incorrect to label his fans as such. But it's funny that even at the time when he was still vital, there was a snickering going on, it seemed. Like, he's not what he used to be, and we can never forget the movies that he made. And it's interesting to note that, he was just X amount of years away from having made those movies. So a lot of these commentators might have had that cemented in their brains. Maybe they're even young enough that they grew up with him in the movies, and Elvis was a movie star, and that's an animal of a different stripe. There's a perspective there that is, I don't think it was right. I think it was erroneous even at the time to label the fans that way. But it's interesting where that comes from. And it was perpetuated through articles like this. And we're, 3 lines in, and it's going on again, that you must be a real redneck to love this man. And there is a snickering and a dismissiveness, which is kind of maddening for us today.
I think even when we were talking about Elvis, that's the way it is. And we were referring to a 1970 article by Jerry Hopkins in Rolling Stone. And there was even an element of that. Jerry Hopkins, very fine writer and researcher and author. But there was even this urge to really emphasize a Southern accent when they are writing speech, even, to almost a cartoonish sort of level.
Yeah, that's true. And interesting to dig into this, because why is that? And I think a lot of it is that Elvis Presley was from the South, and he epitomized a Southern lifestyle. And the idea, even Hank Williams before him, is the dirt poor. And then when you are no longer dirt poor, you are extravagantly wealthy with the clothes and the jewelry. And I guess you could call it a prejudice, but there is a way down there, and the South is what it is. And he came from that and epitomized that for a lot of even ignorant Northerners who had no idea what was going on down there. Maybe the first Southern man they really got a look at was Elvis Presley. And it might have colored their perception. And that's an interesting kind of cultural topic we could get into for sure.
As we've said, the press transcripts are courtesy of elvisconcerts.com. We'll put on the webpage, we'll put a link if anyone did want to read the whole article. There's another couple of paragraphs devoted to this particular fan that we'll leave. If anyone wants to read it, please do. We'll mercifully not subject our listeners to it. But towards the end of the article, he does actually get to some interesting commentary. We might not necessarily agree, but at least it was kind of thoughtfully compiled. We also get a bit of an idea of the atmosphere and the staging. So meanwhile, the backup groups, Elvis uses 3, had been towed into place aboard the portable bandstand. They waited in place as the chuck wagon races were run around them, which just about freaked the Sweet Inspirations, and, who could blame them for that? While the bandstand slowly turned 180 degrees, the cheap seaters never got more than a profile. Elvis worked his little heart out for about 50 minutes. And again, I assume at the Sunday evening performance, the act was less than dynamite, although I can't truly think of an act in show business that could play that joint and expect to do more than survive. Now, Gary, he goes on here to talk about the set list a little bit. Whoever decides such things has thought it best that Elvis over the past couple of years changed his image from basic grease rocker to complete singer. Consequently, he does everything from Peggy Lee tunes to sacred music to Neil Diamond. Barely 50% of the material used in his Dome act is associated with him, except for Hound Dog, which you, of course, mentioned, Gary, and Love Me Tender. The Nostalgics could have done better with KILT's Oldie Elvis Weekend.
I was having problems, as I said, from the get-go with his ridiculous opening paragraphs. And as I read, I started to roll my eyes thinking, okay, he's one of those type writers, like, I think the word is snarky. Like, yeah, I do hate a snarky review or a snarky piece on a singer, and I don't know, I really had to, like, whoever decides such things, he says, like, it's interesting, like, again, he didn't have the perception that we have today, but I mean, we all know that Elvis himself said, I sing all kinds. And from the get-go, he had a wide breadth of music that he loved. And we also all know that come the 70s and come the Vegas years and the concert years, it was his own desire to put on that complete singer show. This guy doesn't seem to, even the term basic grease rocker, I'm not even sure what that means, but I know what he means, but it's a silly way to put it. So somebody has changed him into the complete singer. Well, we know that that's not really accurate. And 50% of the material used in his Dome act is associated with him. Well, again, the set list here, there's not really any huge surprises for you and I today, George. We understand that this was a common set list from the time, and he made these songs his own, and he made them part of his set list throughout the 70s. And here the guy is beginning to almost lament that the 50s are over, almost be sad that Elvis no longer sings or performs or makes records like he used to in the 50s. Well, it's no longer the 50s. It's 74 now, and his show is different. It's still, like I said before, a very energetic, muscular show with its roots in rock and roll. And he's a singer though, and he is a complete singer at the time. And so it's a little bit tone deaf to suggest that it's not like the 50s. So I got a problem with that. That's even a kind of a silly thing for a reviewer to say. When we Elvis people hear such a review, it enrages us in a way because it's a clear indication that, we think the reviewer doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know how things work in Elvis world. But all those things are what make these reviews equally legitimate. We Elvis people have to accept that reviews like this often depict how Elvis was viewed by maybe more discerning eyes or just regular Joes who wrote about entertainers every week, various entertainers, not just Elvis, and kind of how the outsiders looked at him. And that view is going to differ from, the way that we look at him. So we also have to accept that sometimes opinions from the outside are significant and make sense. I guess it's legit for a reviewer to look at a show like this and to ask where the rock and roll is. People like us understand that, especially in the 70s, Elvis, like I just said, he filled his shows with rock and country and gospel and big ballads. That was what you expected. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that the opinions of the outsiders are sometimes valid and have to be considered. This reviewer does make some valid points. It doesn't excuse some of the ludicrosities that he schleps out. And we'll get to the final paragraph here in a minute. I have some more thoughts about that as well.
Actually, just on the show, I think the way that you described it as muscular, I think that really is the perfect kind of term for that, because there is this kind of this depth and this strength in the vocal and the music and its title. I think muscular is a great way to describe it. Now, this last paragraph that you alluded to, Gary, this is interesting because it kind of actually gets to some analysis. As I said, whether we agree with it or not, at least it is posing an interesting question. Now, he precedes that. Presley now does a Las Vegas headliner act. It's a good one, but heaven knows the Dome is not the place to stage it. Less Presley's fault than the people who booked him. Now, the final paragraph, but you've seen lots of Las Vegas headliner acts just like it. It's odd to see an original making himself ordinary. The slicker Presley gets, the less interesting he is. If Presley could again sound as though he cuts records in someone's garage, he could blow right out of the water any single act in the business. In his present incarnation, done up in sparkle-plenty jumpsuits, he looks and occasionally performs like the oldest Osmond. You have alluded to this, and this has been a theme that you've kind of explored, and most recently in your article on Tom Jones, about something that probably is not there now, but was in this period of the 70s, this kind of stigma about Las Vegas.
Yeah, again, maybe it's one of the many times where you think, it's tough because we weren't there living at that time. And the regular Joe sitting on his couch, how he would look at a performer like Elvis Presley, Tom Jones, even like a Robert Goulet or somebody, this Vegas act, this Vegas performer. Like I've read many times with many different performers, Tom Jones in particular, most recently, they bristle at that. Like, what are you even talking about, a Vegas act? Like, I just get up there and sing. I have a band and some singers or whatever. Now, it's a difference, I guess, if you have some juggler coming through or acrobats flying around or showgirls with the big headdress. I mean, that might be more associated with Las Vegas. But if you're a performer who performs, Las Vegas asks you to come there, you perform there, that's a Vegas act. I think I'd have to push back a little bit against that. But at the time, like I say, not having been there, at the time, Elvis was spending a lot of time in Las Vegas, and a lot of performers were. So maybe there was this thing that outsiders like this reviewer would look at that as a Vegas type show. Elvis might not know what you're talking about. He probably sang, well, he did the same way Saginaw to Las Vegas. It was the same show. So I don't really appreciate that part of the finale of this article. But again, I had to begrudgingly consider the final article because in a way I have to say it's legit commentary. Well, in a way, like, many Elvis people, I remember even John Lennon among them, when he met with Elvis, one of the things he said was, I paraphrase, but are you ever going to go back to making straight up rock and roll? So even at this early juncture, Elvis people lament the changes Elvis made in his music over the years. And, I get that and might even agree somewhat, but this also reflects fans' desires for the artists they love to stay in their lanes and keep doing what they themselves like and want from that performer, which of course is unreasonable to ask because, what about progression and looking over the horizon? An artist who wants to go further afield with his music. So the slicker Presley gets, the less interesting he is. I guess we have to accept this as contemporary for the time commentary on how Elvis looked and the jumpsuits, and we all know that made Elvis stand out from most every other performer. I had just finished reading, I think it was an article on the late Alan Osmond, who just died recently, that Elvis had met with the boys in Las Vegas somewhere and had apparently suggested they adopt the jumpsuit look, because I've noticed even on some of their album covers that they're wearing kind of jumpsuits. And so if that's to be believed, then he's not necessarily alone in that sort of visual appearance. But to suggest that he again goes back and sounds like he cuts records in someone's garage is a little bit unreasonable to ask. It's funny that nowadays, a lot of artists, I always think of, again, Tom Jones with his last 3 or 4 records, Johnny Cash's American recordings with Rick Rubin. Sometimes, they go back and strip it right down, and even, Bob Dylan's records, some of Willie Nelson's stuff, it's very back to the earth. But generally, I don't think, especially in the 70s, guys were always going forward and looking to see what was happening at the time and what was next. But I begrudgingly give him some respect for the final paragraph, because I get that. There's lots to unpack about it, and we could talk for a long time about it. But it's interesting that he says, I know that he's got it in him because he could blow other artists right out of the water, which is a compliment still, because Elvis always contained multitudes. He always had that bigness to him. It's an interesting final paragraph. The guy's kind of right, and he kind of makes me mad, but, Elvis people, we always kind of put a bit of a higher gloss on Elvis, and, maybe we should look at him a bit more honestly. This guy gives us something to chew on, definitely.
But it's interesting that he makes these kind of Vegas observations about this particular show, which out of all the shows in the 70s is probably the least Vegas-sounding show of any of them, because it's just a rock and roll band.
How is it Vegas? I mean, what makes it Vegas? They're even out in the dirt where there's probably still manure all over the place. And talk about down south and Allman Brothers down and dirty, and we just play rock and roll. It's just instruments and singing.
Yeah.
And there's no show, quote unquote, at all, really. So I guess he's stuck on the idea that Elvis performs in Las Vegas. So it's a Las Vegas act, but this definitely, like you say, is definitely, there's no Vegas shine to this.
And Elvis always had a bit of a sense of humor about himself. And early on, he introduces himself as event number 8, which was
pretty comical. So, it's funny too that he was part of a big show. Yeah, things were going on as well as Elvis.
Exactly. And I think the audience, as I said, you don't get much of a sense of the audience until the end when he's kind of saying farewells. And then you can really hear, if you listen, especially if you're listening with phones, you can really hear the enthusiasm of the audience. So I think they might have disagreed with Mr. Millar's review. Let's just move on very quickly. Now, Duke Bardwell, who played bass during this period, is fascinating, and there's lots to talk about for him, which I think we'll probably save most of it for another time. But in an interview that he subsequently gave with the Elvis Australia website, he talked about the Houston Astrodome and how much he enjoyed it. I think that's why I enjoyed the 74 show at the Houston Astrodome so much, because it was just Elvis, the band, and the singers. So we couldn't do all those songs. We had to rock and roll because it was the Livestock and Rodeo show, and we went on right after the cattle. But it was a lot of fun. It really was. So Duke played until early 75 when Jerry Sheff came back. I think he got a bit of a rough time. I think Elvis's frame of mind kind of disintegrated a little bit as 1974 progressed. Some of the onstage banter got a little, perhaps not darker exactly, but perhaps certainly a little less light-hearted. Duke Bardwell, I think, felt with some justification that he was on the wrong end of it a little bit. Now, he played the first Vegas season in 75 and on the Today album sessions. And just to show that when you're out, they actually took his bass off the album and redid it, except on the single Trouble. And I wonder about this, Gary. Had Duke Bardwell come in 76, whether or not it might have been a different ballgame, because you only have to hear how much Elvis loved working with people like Larry London and Shane Keister, and how welcoming he was to Bobby Ogden, who came in for the last few months in 77 on clavinet. And, Elvis was very warm and very welcoming to them. And you just wonder if Duke Bardwell was just in at the wrong time, and Elvis wasn't certainly in the same frame of mind that he was in later on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know, not to get too deep, but I mean, maybe 74 was a bit of an entranceway for Elvis into the final stages, and perhaps on some deep, deep level, knowing that he was approaching a dead end made him, irritable, to say the least, and not in a good frame of mind. As it began to settle on him that he had no way out, maybe that was very jarring for him, and it was not a good time to be around him. This is just my opinion, but I wonder if, like you say, 76 and 77, Elvis, he did seem, from the stories and from the banter that we've heard on recordings, he does seem a little bit more lighthearted in a way, as if he's resigned to the fact that, I wonder if he thought that the end was near, or if he felt like,
yeah, that's interesting.
Gosh, I really can't go on much more like this, can I? So he was almost resigned to it, and was maybe a little bit more lighthearted and easier to be around. So it might have been a big difference, because with such a tight unit, I mean, Elvis World was tight in itself, but Elvis's musical world, his band, would have been even tighter. So for him to have been welcoming to new faces and new ways and to new instrumentalists, then something would have had to have been different in his psyche to allow for that. So Duke might have been much more welcomed, for sure. That's an interesting point you bring up.
And I think also Duke Bardwell was a very talented singer-songwriter and musician, but he wasn't a specialist bass player. He wasn't Jerry Sheff. But
no,
you can hear his bass work during this show, and it's on point and it's great. And you can hear him. There's a great soundboard of the first Las Vegas season in 75 when Elvis came back after a layoff of maybe 6 months. Duke Bardwell's playing there is great. Does fantastic work on the live version of Promised Land from that. So. But yes, look, he's a fascinating guy, and certainly someone who merits more discussion down the track. Now, as we said, this was the second appearance at the Livestock Show and Rodeo. Elvis had played there in 1970. That was, in fact, the first non-Las Vegas performance of the 70s. Now, he played 6 shows there in 1970. Now, this must have caused a few frayed nerves. The first show, only 16,700 people in the stadium, 4,000 of which were special needs children who had been given free tickets as guests of Colonel Parker and Elvis. And I think, from what we can read, he was actually quite rattled about the kind of half-empty stadium. But by that night, they were in the high 30s and then over 40. So it was only that one matinee show that was sparsely attended. Got some very good press. The Houston Post, Elvis Presley brought down the house, and all the attendance records of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo came tumbling down on the shoulders of his white shirt Saturday night at the Astrodome. Presley, the entertainment sensation of 15 years ago, is making his first public appearance in 10 years and proved his audience appeal still exists. The Port Arthur News said although Presley appeared at only 6 of the 15 performances of the rodeo, because there were some other entertainers on the roster as well, he accounted for more than half of the total attendance, drawing 43,634 at one performance, a single program record, which, of course, as we've just learnt, he broke in 1974. Another interesting perhaps footnote or fascinating visitor to Elvis history, Gary, in 1970, on drums, Bob Lanning, who had also played the first Vegas engagement in 1970 and appeared on the On Stage album, got on very well with Elvis. He's another interesting person that we will talk about in much more detail in the future. But here's one thing, Gary. In an interview with Myrna Smith of the Sweet Inspirations, the invitation for Elvis to play at the rodeo in 1970 did not include the Sweet Inspiration. The Sweet Inspirations, they were told, leave the black girls at home. To their eternal credit, Elvis and Colonel Parker refused and in fact demanded that the Sweet Inspirations be given VIP treatment, otherwise they'd cancel. You can hear Myrna Smith's account of that in an interview, which we will put a link to on the website.
Yeah, it's a shame, I mean, that's American history at the time. We're all on a first name basis with that sort of nonsense. And great to hear, though. Let's try to keep it positive that a lot of performers, we've often heard of Frank Sinatra doing the same thing in Las Vegas and other places. Part of it might have been, do not tell me how to put on my show, no matter who you're talking about. But also there would have been the injustice of it that I like to think Elvis and the Colonel would have wanted to fight against. So, it's something else to consider when we look back on history from this time and look back on the performers. And, it's tough to be in the business, but when you're faced with this sort of nonsense, like these people were pretty heroic what they put up with, and were still able to not only function, but to perform at a high level. Pretty impressive, and again, sad commentary, but there's let's just focus on the victory there where they refused and the show went on.
In as much as we know that Colonel Parker could be quite dismissive and sometimes just outright rude to the touring band, they did enjoy very good working conditions throughout the 70s. They did look after each other. Jackie Kahane, for instance, the comedian, got a very rough time in Madison Square Garden. And I gather the announcer, who I think was Al Dvorin at the time, basically went out and said, look, Jackie Kahane is Elvis's friend. We're a touring family. Show him some respect. So, they did take care of each other, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, that's good. They banded together, yeah. They would have known that what is hard for me to conceive looking back from this point is that it was a show. There was a lot of people involved, not just Elvis. And so you have to respect everybody, even the opening comedian. Yeah, that's interesting perspective.
Once again, we'll put a picture of this on the website as well, but it's interesting to just look at a picture of the band on stage there, and you've got the TCB band in their, quite restrained uniforms. And then you've got Voice in these kind of very 70s kind of dungarees kind of.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. Little overalls with the really loud shirts popping. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Okay, Gary. So here we are in 1974. Elvis has put on a great show at the Houston Astrodome as part of the rodeo. Do you have any final thoughts on either the review or the show?
Well, it's still, again, I often talk about perspective and context, and we form our thoughts in 2026, and we have the benefit of, the last, almost 100 years of entertainment history. We have the perspective, we understand what was going on in the 40s and how that bled into we understand about history. But looking back, at the time, it's fascinating, and credit to you for digging up these articles and these reviews that are such a insightful way to look at artists from back in the day, because the very next morning, there are the thoughts of this reviewer who is not starry-eyed, as a lot of us are when it comes to Elvis. But it's interesting how he was perceived, Elvis Presley, at the time, what it meant to reviewers and casual. It's hard to believe there was any, but I guess there was casual fans or people that didn't even really care too much about Elvis Presley, how he was perceived at the time. So looking at it through reviews and articles from the press is a fascinating way to look at it. This is a great show to be able to listen to all these years later. Again, we look at concerts nowadays. A guy comes to town, maybe he's got an opener, maybe he doesn't. That's it, bye. But this was the Livestock Show, George. This was the rodeo. There might have been rodeo clowns rolling around, hiding in the barrel.
Yeah.
And
yes.
That was part of the evening. And there was horses and cows and bulls. I don't know what. And other parts of the act, And then let me see now who's up next on the bill. From Memphis, Tennessee, it's Elvis Presley, and he joked himself. He's performer number 8, and he was just part of the show, and he's out in the field, and so it's really fascinating. And we can get into the weeds and talk about Colonel Tom and how he saw packaging Elvis at this time and the backwoods places he had him. And I mean, backwoods, I mean, look at the numbers you talked about earlier, the crowding 45,000 people and the record numbers. I mean, this is no joke. This is a lot of people. And, you know, the reviewer might have snickered the next day, but did he not consider the number of people that were there freaking out and screaming? So it's great to look at it from this perspective and to drill down, and it gives us a really interesting insight into Elvis Presley at different points in his career.
He does acknowledge at the end of the show that this is the largest live audience that he has played to.
Yes,
and obviously self-deprecating, makes him a little bit nervous. But now that record for him would hold until the end of 75, of course, when on New Year's Eve, on a freezing, stormy night, he played the Pontiac Silverdome.
Right.
62,000 people for that one. So
that's right.
And you can also, and if you're interested, if people are interested in the tour itinerary, we've also put that on the webpage as well. Once again, thanks to elvisconcerts.com. And Gary, it's been great to unpack another Elvis show and the press coverage with you again. Thank you for your insights, and we'll look forward to seeing you again very soon.
I've really enjoyed it once again. Thank you for your hard work, and it was a good time. I look forward to next time. Duke Bardwell is an interesting character, and I'm not familiar with him at all. I actually questioned you, George, when you mentioned the name. I had to look because it sounded, I thought, that sounds like, a bounty hunter show from the 1980s,
Yes, it does.
Like I thought, Duke Bardwell, is that really? So I'm picturing a Grizzly Adams-looking guy, and judging by the picture, he does not look like that at all. So he might be a subject for a discussion in the future. Duke Bardwell, that's an interesting story.
I've got Rick Dowland in my mind there. Maybe that was the kind of the failed try to follow up to Bounty Law.
Maybe it was. That's right.
Yeah.
Duke Bardwell. What a handle.
Yeah. It's brilliant. And this was written by. Hang on, I've just got to sort the paperwork out here. Here's one for the bloopers reel at the end. Okay, let's go to the review in the Houston Chronicle. Jeff Millar. Okay, I'll just if I can just find where to. As I have to relearn this every time. Stop recording. Here we go. You can get in touch with us at DEC4podcast.com or leave a comment or question on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, or our social media. Follow Gary Wells at soulrideblog.com, your home for vintage leisure, and Oliver Crocker at devonfirebooks.com and at the Bill Podcast on Patreon or your preferred platform. Check out some great travel videos and tips from Steve Collins on his YouTube channel, Steve Collins Traveller, formerly Please Tell Me Where to Go. Our original instrumental theme and mellow sounds are thanks to Detlef Wolf and hardworking Gainesville, Europe's top Tom Petty tribute band out of Germany. Find them at gainesville-band.com. We take some external guidance on the fair use of potentially copyrighted material for commentary and critique. Details at our website. The DEC4 podcast is available under Creative Commons. This has been George Fairbrother. Thank you for listening.